Welcome back. We're going to be doing the same process, but completely in the box using VSTs and plugins. Let's get right into it. We'll be recreating the first sound from the last video. For the first sound, we have Artoria's Mini V3, a clone of the Model D. We have the Yamaha DX7 emulation by Artoria. And since there isn't a Prophet Rev 2 emulation, we have the Prophet 5 emulation by Artoria. And then lastly, we have the Roland Juno 60. Altogether, these sound like. So the stack sounds without any processing. We're going to the mix bus, and on the mix bus processing, we have Gullfoss first, which is an intelligent EQ. And we're using this to improve the clarity, detail, and the spatiality. Next, we have Tone Empire's Model 5000. It's one of my favorite bus compressors, and it's based on the API 2500. After the bus compressor, I'm going into Tone Empire's Real Light. I'm using a preset that's based on the Stutter A80 tape machine. I'm using it to get some of the compression from tape and a little bit of the saturation, but not the wow and flutter. To add a little more saturation and get a baseline for the wow and flutter, I'm using the J37 by Waves, and then I'm adding a bit of noise and wobble with RC20, automating the wobble, so I can get the same effect of when I was tapping on the actual reel-to-reel tape machine. And lastly, I have an ML4000 by Mic DSP as a limiter, just to boost the signal. So let's hear how it sounds loaded into a sampler. Okay, I think this is a good start. I'm feeling the vibe of the sound, but it's still a bit dry. So I'll go for Convology XT. It's one of my favorite reverbs for production and synths. It has a lot of emulations of classic hardware. So this one's based on the Eventide H3500. I think this verb fits perfectly for what I'm going for. Now that we got the vibe right with the reverb, let's play around with it to get a feel for the sound. Now into the second tape sound. And for this, I wanted to go for another kind of CS80, super deep evolving pad. For the first sound, we have the Selena. Next, we have an emulation of the New England Synclavier. It was a Rolls-Royce of FM synthesis from 1979. Next, we have Obsession by Synapse Audio, which is an emulation of the classic Oberheim OBXA. And for the last layer, we have the Mini, an emulation of the classic Moog Model D. So for this, I set it up to have modulation going across the key bed where the rate increases. So when I play it on the lower octaves, the LFO is moving at a slower rate, and further up the keyboard, the LFO is moving at a faster rate. That's on the lower side. And now the higher. Now let's hear all the sounds together to get a feel for what the patch might sound like when it's done. And now with no processing. Let's load it into the Mellotron sampler to get a feel for it. Okay, now let's load it into structure free. patch 3. For the first sound, we have the PPG Wave 2.2 by Waldorf, which is an emulation of the classic synth of the same name. And for this patch, we're going for a guitar sound, a digital wavetable guitar. For the second patch, we're using Arturia's emulation of the Oberheim OBXA. For a classic vintage poly sound. Next, we have the SEM 2. And for this patch, we're doing an ARP. And for the last layer, we're using the CZV, which is an emulation of the Casio CZ101. This layer is doing a haunting digital voice. Let's hear how they all sound together without processing. Now let's chop them up, export them, and re-import them into a sampler. Back in a structure free so I can use them as a multi-sampled instrument. Let's try out some chords to see how this one sounds all together. It's like a vaporwave dream. So let's take all the sounds that we just created and use them together in a couple of compositions to get a feel for how they work best.
You did that